There we go. So this little chunk of area was my little circle garden beds, and like yesterday I went through to kind of work on it, and I found like a super huge rock, and I went to dig it out, and it made this huge hole in the garden bed. So I kind of decided, since Hügelkultur is a practice that's pretty well known and it's one that people kind of talk and ask about a lot, if we do that out here in Arizona. And the thing with Hügelkultur is it's more, so it's kind of from, I think, Eastern Europe, Germany is where it kind of developed and was utilized a lot, if I understand correctly. But they're a little bit more wet and rainy, so that practice works a little bit better in kind of wet and rainy areas to certain degrees. So when it comes to certain practices, you tend to have to kind of tweak them and kind of adapt the practice to your location and your environment. So we're gonna do just kind of a Hügelkultur experiment bed so I can fill this giant hole that I created, but it's also gonna require a little bit of kind of finessing and working this area. So I'm gonna kind of rebuild the bed and then build the Hügelkultur kind of pile in the hole, because Hügelkultur, kind of it's mound gardening. So you create a mound with materials and you garden on that mound. So I'm adapting the practice like many do, but I'm going to adapt it to put it in the ground, because here in Arizona we have found that raised beds like the one behind me, they are pretty tricky to keep wet enough. And even in these beds, not that it's exactly a Hügelkultur bed, but there were a lot of wood chips and just like woody material that went into these beds. And throughout the past like 2 years of working these beds, that wood really isn't doing anything. It's still actually pretty much just dry wood in the raised garden bed. So we're going to adapt the practice. We're going to do the Hügelkultur in the ground, and from that point on we'll just see how it does and kind of tinker with that experiment in this particular environment. So what I'm going to start off doing, I'm just going to dig this area out some more. I'm going to dig as deep as I can. That's kind of another issue we have a little bit, is being able to dig down, because all of these large rocks, like all of these rocks here, were this hole here. So that is one reason this bed didn't do super awesome, was because most of it was actually just rock and I didn't notice when I first built it. So I'm fixing that, but destroyed it in the process of fixing it. So we're going to create a Hügelkultur bed, and hopefully this area will just do even better. Even if a lot of this is still super rocky, hopefully this nice spongy hole that we will create will help not only this bed here, but the ones next to it. But that's part of the experiment. So I'm going to start digging this out, and I am going to dig out this chunk of kind of what was left over growing, because the circle bed was like right here. So I'm going to dig that out, dig out this area, and I'll replant this as well as plant some other stuff when we get there. So I'm going to start off with digging out this area. Where is me shovel? Where did I put the other shovel? Too rocky for that one. There's another big rock in here, so that's another reason this bed wasn't doing awesome. But there's worms from the other beds, so I won't need to put worms when I build this bed. The worms from the other beds will move into here. So that's kind of nice when it comes to inoculating one bed with worms, is once they're established, they'll start migrating out from there into the other garden beds. But I was trying to be kind of gentle so I don't rip out too many roots, so I can replant as much of this as I can. There's another big old rock there. Alright, so now that I have removed those plants, you can kind of see that I was struggling trying to dig out around even more rocks. Oh Lord. And that's the one downer with all these rocks, is it'll look like a tiny rock, and maybe not so much this one, but you'll go to dig it out and it's this huge rock, and it creates quite a pothole. So it definitely sucks when you find one in the garden because it tears up the garden, but it also gives you the opportunity to kind of rebuild the area, remove those rocks, and hopefully just create a better environment for better plant growth, as well as water penetration, because sometimes a rock can create kind of the issue where it'll hit the rock and it just kind of runs and flows away essentially, so it doesn't actually sit in the soil. So less big rocks. I'm gonna dig out this area, and then if you've left like comments and stuff, I'll go check out those comments. But I'm gonna dig out this area pretty much as deep as I can get. I have no idea when it comes to the rocks. I wanted to remove that rock, but it's like this whole area, and it's actually like super deep down. So that'll be the edge of the new garden bed, which is nice that it is that edge, because hopefully that'll just kind of force the water to stay at least within the garden space area. So we'll see what is under here. A root? It's not a root. We have a root. So, how big is this root? Come over this way. More rocks. See if I can find some hedge clippers. No, but I have bolt cutters. Don't judge. Perfect. Bam. Alright, let's get rid of some of this dirt. And it's really nice though too that even though this area is super rocky, this dirt is pretty clayey and pretty decent. It's not as loamy and sandy as a lot of the other areas. So this is a good spot for a garden space. More worms. Another worm. It'd be easier if I had a spade shovel, but I have no idea where it went. Dig a little more and then check some comments. Another root. So that's my edge, a circle. So I do want to come this way a little more. Some comments. Let's see. Michael Garfield, Pathfinder, good job, nice work. Thank you very much. It's nice, even though it's the middle of January, it's warm outside, so I love doing gardening in January. Hippocrates garden just jumped in. So what exactly is the reason for trying a Hügelkultur bed here? And was the woody material from on site or was it being brought in from off the property? So, I'm a little out of breath, sorry. The reason to do this Hügelkultur bed is partially experimental. Like, of course we know that it is a practice that definitely works, but when it comes to our particularly like dry, arid, air-wise climate, it can be really hard to, what's the term, fully saturate the wood with water, because that's one of the main things with Hügelkultur is the wood absorbs a bunch of water, it breaks down, creates homes for all the microbes and fungal and bacterial life. It breaks down, adds fluffiness to the dirt, and just like all the good stuff, the nutrients. But here, when you walk out into our landscape, you can find, because there's a lot of sheet flow, a lot of sediment movement, that a lot of pieces of wood get buried. And when you look at it, you can tell that this wood's been buried a really long time, but it's still almost like regular, still hardwood. Like, it's definitely been broken down, but our environment shows that it's really hard for wood to get wet enough to break down in the fashion that you would want it to in a hugelkultur bed, if that makes sense. It's very hard to, especially with the raised bed aspect. Out here, it does not work as wonderfully. Using the rocks as I have definitely helps when it comes to, they'll absorb the heat instead of the garden bed, and then they can release that heat at night, keeping the bed warm. But the fact that they're raised off the ground, you get more heat and evaporation exchange through the sides, and it's just harder to keep raised beds wet enough. And normal hugelkultur, it's a mound, which is essentially a raised bed. So we're going to put it in the hole, and being it's going to be a place where we're growing stuff, I'm going to be watering it as often as I'm going to be watering it. That wood'll have way more of a chance to absorb the water to break down, but it's still going to take time. And if I had thought of it sooner, the wood that I'm putting in there, I would have actually done an initial soaking and let it soak as long as I can, because as many of us know, you could have a stick or a log that floats in the ocean for a really long time because it takes a really long time for it to become waterlogged. And with hugelkultur, that's almost what you want. You want almost a waterlogged log. And that's really hard to do here. So this is an experiment to really see. I'm going to try out this method. It's just kind of what I've experienced and just kind of my plan of action. And I'll explain it as I kind of fill the hole with material. But we're definitely going for smaller pieces of wood so that there's more surface area for it to have a chance to absorb water. And definitely making sure, when I watch a lot of videos of people creating hugelkultur beds on social media, something I notice is there's not enough kind of compacting and almost not appropriately layering. There's not really a wrong way to layer, but there's a lot of airspace. There's a lot of gaps. And for here, we really don't want that because the water will just run through the material to the bottom of the bed and just be absorbed by the ground underneath itself versus the material in the hole. So we want to kind of adapt the process for our environment so that instead of, because at first the wood is actually going to kind of sap away water in a sense. So I want to see how that is going to affect this little garden bed. And I'll have sort of control beds next to it that don't have any of the hugelkultur kind of build. And we'll just kind of see, I guess, what happens. That was kind of a long, rambly explanation, but I hope I covered the question okay. Polka Dot Adventures, have you considered adding fungal material to the wood? So in reality, that's definitely a great option, but it's not really something we need to do too much of because there's tons, even though this is a dry, arid area, there's still tons of just native fungus. And we would much rather work with what's native here. And if you build it, they will come. So if I build an area that there's going to be a fungus, it's oh yeah, this is my jam. And it'll be native, it's from the area, and it'll take over and do its fun guy stuff. And so it's definitely an option, especially if I wanted to maybe try and grow a specific mushroom. I would bring in outside fungus. But with the junipers here, something that a lot of people, I get, maybe just don't know in a sense, but these juniper, when they drop all their debris, it actually, with any other tree, but it creates this really nice organic layer. And even though the mulch is too thick for anything to grow in it, there's tons of fungus and native bacteria breaking that down. So that I do take that material from under the tree and I will be adding that into the bed. So I'm just gonna inoculate the bed with just the native fungus and bacteria that I find locally. Oh, and that reminds me, all the wooden stuff and all this material, except I guess the compost, we had gotten some cow manure a while back. That is not, I guess, local. But everything else, the wood, what else? Yeah, the wood, the juniper, and everything else is essentially local or upcycled, essentially. Polka Dot Adventures, also, how alkaline is your soil? So we're not entirely sure, but there's kind of this funny happening here. So we do have a lot of lime. So we are going to be more alkaline in kind of the general scope, but also a lot of the plants don't really seem to mind that so far. But then we also have the aspect of these junipers because they are kind of acidic. So we do have these junipers actually kind of working with the soil in that fashion. They're acidic, the lime is alkaline, and they kind of help counter each other. So that is another reason I like putting some of the juniper debris material in the beds to hope to kind of balance the pHs a little bit. But otherwise, we haven't really seen too many pH issues with anything so far. I think my rhubarb was the only plant that didn't really seem to like this soil so much. So at some point later this year, I'll be building it a very fancy, nice, no real native soil in it, just to hopefully make it happy. Michael Woods said hi. Hello. Joey Jones, yes, the fungus among us. We always need the fungus among us. Like, I think that's something that a lot of people really don't understand, is that fungus and bacteria are what make the world go round, including like our guts and stuff. So like, we need lots of that fungus among us. And for us, we want the native stuff because it's been adapted to the area. Polka Dot Adventures. So pulling from what's beneath the junipers is a great call. Yes, definitely, especially when it comes to just kind of the frugal, you know, on the cheap DIY kind of aspect. As much material as you can find from your property to build beds with is a great practice to do, because you're using local native stuff and you're just going to be kind of compounding all that goodness into your garden space versus trying to spend money to outsource materials to build garden beds. So, and we all can, you know, we all have our different hindrances and when we're trying to build stuff, but definitely using anything local that you can get your hands on is definitely great. Polka Dot Adventures, yes, rhubarb and its high acidity, yeah. So I'm thinking maybe right under a juniper, the rhubarb might be pretty happy. But all right, so hold questions for a minute. I'm gonna work some more on this bed. I might talk a little bit as I go, but I wanna clear out some of the stuff that I have dug out, see how much deeper I can go. I kind of feel like I'm getting ready to hit a rock shelf, so it's probably not gonna be too much further. But then once I clear it out, we'll start actually filling the hole with the Hügelkultur materials. I don't know if you can see, but like, it's half rock and half dirt. People ask us if we grow anything, we grow rocks. And it's hard to see too, but like with the lime in this soil, it's pretty interesting because, you know, just over eons essentially, you know, rain falls, minerals get dissolved, they run between, the water and those minerals run between the rocks. And it's so hot and dry here, and especially with the rocks like absorbing a lot of heat, it very quickly dries the water between the rocks and it just leaves behind the minerals. So a lot of the rocks, I don't know if you can see from way over there, but a lot of rocks are coated in this lime material because the water runs in all the cracks of the rocks. They get hot, the water dries, it leaves behind all this residue. So it's actually kind of nuts how much mineral we really do have in the soil. It's very rich mineral, but too much mineral can be a bad thing. You know, you get too acidic, too alkaline, depending on what you have too much of. But it's a lot of lime, but it's pretty cool because I don't need to put calcium ever in any of the garden beds because they've got all the different types of limes and salts and stuff already in the soil. All right, no more comments, Groovy. All right, gonna keep digging. I think that's another root. Yep. I've hit the rock shelf, so I'm not gonna be able to get much further. I can clean up the hole, but we ain't getting much deeper than this. And here's more of that lime caliche layer. Sometimes it gets big and fat and it'll come off. Like this was between two rocks, and when you pull the rocks apart, you're left with just a chunk of lime. All right, so I'm pretty satisfied with this Hügelkultur hole instead of a mound. And what I actually want to do, because this is going to be a little separate circle garden because I want to keep it that way for now, I think. I want to kind of build up this edge a little bit with some rocks and start filling the hole. But something else I've been implementing too is I'll go through and do this to all the beds over time, but instead of just setting the rock right on the dirt like that, I actually do want to dig kind of a trench area so that when I build the rock's edge, the rock is sunken in, poking up above the dirt, so that when I water the beds, it'll actually hit that rock and flow down, and will hopefully hinder any of the water from seeping through or kind of underneath the rock versus into the garden bed. But I want a bigger rock for right there. Is this too big? If I fit it like that, maybe. This rock instead. Oh, that's perfect. I do want to raise this up a bit. All right. So I'm going to carve out this ledge just a little. I think there's another big old rock underneath this bed, but we're just gonna leave that one. I don't have time for that right now. But that is one reason that these beds behind me did become raised garden beds, is because there was like huge rocks that we weren't going to be able to dig out. So instead of digging down, we just built the beds up. Great experiment. They're great beds for plants that don't mind drier, hotter kind of scenarios. But for kind of anything else, we need more bowl-like garden beds for sure. Oh, perfect. I'm going to leave this border just open so you can see me fill the hole with material. But I'll take some of the dirt that I've excavated, make sure to kind of backfill, anchor these rocks a little bit. You can always shove little rocks between. Want to make sure we're trying to keep all the water coming into the garden space. We'll do those ones when I work on that garden bed. But so my plan for this Hügelkultur bed, so as I said earlier, we don't want big huge chunks of wood in here. Like I mean, depending on what people have available, the size of wood that they use for their Hügelkultur beds can greatly vary. But here we definitely want smaller wood, more surface area. They'll have more of a chance to absorb water. But we also want to make sure, at least for a time, that the water isn't going to drain out of this hole too quickly. So I kind of have a sort of plan for that. I have no idea how well it works. This is experimental. I figure no matter what, it's going to work and we'll see results. We'll just see how good they end up being. So my plan of action, we're going to start off with good old cardboard. And I know a lot of people kind of wonder and are curious about kind of, you know, knowing what's in the cardboard and ends up in your garden bed. The way I see it is it's not like I'm putting tons and tons of cardboard. Like, sure, we do layer it around, but it's not what I see as an overburden to the environment. Nature can break these things down. It just takes time and becomes destructive when it's a whole bunch of that material at one time. So it's kind of just to everybody's discretion and what they are comfortable doing. Some people don't want anything, you know, manufactured in their garden, and that's fine. You can use whatever non-dyed glued paper that you'd like, whatever suits your fancy and kind of your morals and values. But to me, you'll probably hear me say this pretty often, is no matter what we do with the things we create, whether that's plastic, metal, rubber, cardboard, no matter what we do with that material, in the end, nature is going to have to deal with it. And one of our kind of things is we deal with our own trash, our own garbage. And one of the ways to do that is to give nature the best possible chance to appropriately, slowly, as it can, break things down without hurting anything, if that kind of makes sense. But I'm going to start off, again, back to the Hügelkultur hole. I'm going to start off by layering just maybe 2 layers of just some cardboard, so that when water comes down, even if this cardboard is saturated, it will hold that water for just a little bit longer than if it was just the bare soil. So we're going to start off with some cardboard. And as I said earlier, one thing I really want to avoid is any air pockets within building up these layers. So as I kind of go through, I'm probably going to kind of stomp and compact things down a little bit. And if you're worried that that might cause too much compaction, all this material I'm putting in is already very fluffy. So including like the wood will become a fluffy sponge. So over time, this is going to compact more, but also still be very fluffy. And it'll probably sink as well, so that I'll be able to kind of add and build up the bed over time too. But I don't want any air pockets, I don't want any air space, partially because it'll dry out faster. That space that isn't holding water, as well as that space will make it so the water just falls through the material to the bottom very quickly. And we don't want that. We want the water to slowly filter through the layers of the bed so everything has a chance to absorb as much of that moisture as it can. So stomp this layer in. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with that. So with my method of madness, essentially what I'm going to do, so if you've seen the floor that I've made for the greenhouse, we used these wood cookies and tiled the floor with them. They're just slices of the juniper from around here, but these are some extras that just didn't make the cut, or they were too big, or something like that. But I'm going to put these in the middle of the bed. I'm not going to do the entire bottom. We'll kind of see how many I want to put in there, but I want the densest wood, the thickest wood to be in the middle, so it'll take longer for that space to dry out, but hopefully also that's kind of where the water will end up, and they'll have a longer chance to soak in any water that pools next to them in the bottom. So we'll do, don't know how well you can see from over there, but I'm putting 2. Have this little third one. I think I thought I had one more bigger one like that, but I guess I don't. Alright, so I'm just going to go with these 3 just little chunks of log in the middle. And then I have, so this is wood that has been dead for probably 100 years, like kind of literally 100 years. So it's already started the breakdown process. In a sense, it's already inoculated with kind of the fungus and bacteria that would be trying to break it down. And hopefully, being in this bed, it'll be a little bit wetter, it'll break down a little bit faster. So I'll be inoculating kind of the newer wood with older wood. So this is just all the splinters of the older wood. I don't want this to stack so much. I want it to be almost a single layer of these sticks, because again, no airspace. We're trying to avoid airspace, especially between sticks and materials, because if you threw a pile of sticks and then threw leaves, you're going to have more airspace between those sticks and those leaves than you'd really want. Or depending on your situation, it's more than I would really want. So I'm going to do just kind of like a single solid layer of these sticks. I'm happy with this little layer of sticks around the central kind of fat logs. Now there's still all this space between those sticks that I want to fill with smaller material. And I think I'm going to do kind of several different materials that I have gathered around. But I want to start off with, this is the material from under the junipers. And I better show y'all if, let's see, find a good piece right there. So if you look at this bit of debris from under the juniper, you can see this fungus and bacteria action. Even though this is like crispy dry, there is still fungus and bacteria breaking down this material. So they're adapted for the really dry conditions. And one of the possible issues could be that they won't do super awesome if I put them in the garden bed and keep them wet all the time. But for the most part, the wetter the better when it comes to fungus and bacteria. So hopefully they'll enjoy the new environment. I'll be inoculating that wood in the bottom even more so with fungus and bacteria, and just cultivating an environment with lots of diversity in fungus and bacteria to break down all this material. And since I'm over here, comments. MG, heyo, didn't know you were doing a live and just saw this flipping through. Well, hello, thank you for joining the live. It was kind of a random day to do one. I had worked in the garden yesterday and I pulled out a giant rock and it ruined the garden space. So I'm redoing it with just a Hügelkultur whole garden space. And just like when it comes to the dry conditions out here, I'm just kind of switching it up. You know, Hügelkultur tends to be the mounds when it comes to kind of the original use or building of the beds. It's a mound. You do layers of logs and sticks and organic matter and you have a raised garden bed essentially. It's too dry here for that. We experimented with our 2 raised garden beds, too dry. So we're gonna take that Hügelkultur practice and sink it into the ground. Polka Dot Adventures. No, juniper mycelium loves water and has been used for a century at least. And see, and that's kind of the thing is, yes, it definitely does. For the most part, most fungus and bacteria, even more plant-specific stuff, they do tend to love water. But it's super awesome that, like, we can cultivate the stuff that even if for some reason I never water that bed, it's not like all the fungus will die. So it's super amazing just to cultivate what's natural. And of course, you know, it's survival of the fittest. So, you know, the more diversity we can put into a bed, the more good diversity we will build. Some might not make it due to whatever circumstance, and others will greatly thrive. So we're able to slowly cultivate the perfect bacteria, fungus army to help kind of revitalize and keep the soil alive and whatnot. Polka Dot Adventures. Sorry, I'm 3rd gen native Arizonan and I love the high, oh no, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Chaparral? Since I was old enough to know what it was. I apologize that I do not know what it is. But no, it's super awesome to have like native Arizona folks that check out my channel just because I am not a native Arizonan. And if anyone's wondering, I'm from Montana, born and raised. And I super love Arizona, and it's actually super crazy how similar Montana is to Arizona. Like, looking out here at our personal landscape, like, to me, this looks just like Montana. There's just a slightly different diversity of, you know, certain faunas and floras, and there's no crazy winter. So I sure love Arizona, and the fact that I am in a dress, I mean, I got jeans on, but the fact that it is the middle of January and I am not bundled up like an Eskimo is fabulous. Chaparral. Chaparral, is that right? Thank you, I appreciate it. I'm terrible at English, is not my favorite language, even though it's my first. But anyway, we'll get back to the bed, and I'm gonna add in this juniper material. And then I have some other materials that I'll keep adding in. But I want to fill in the space between all this wood, and I'll probably stomp it down a little bit to compact it and just make sure I am negating any air pockets as much as I can. Oops. that's a decent layer to start with. Do some stomping. And now I actually do want to just take some of the dirt that I had excavated, and I do want to kind of sprinkle it in there because this obviously has good nutrients. It's sandy, it's silty, and what I don't want to do is create a bed of just fluffy material because, as I said, with kind of the juniper debris, it's too fluffy, it's too thick under the junipers, and that's one reason not a lot of stuff grows under the junipers. Because if you're a seed and you land on something that's fluffy, that water just kind of penetrates through and doesn't have the time to absorb, you might sprout, but then you're just going to kind of dry and wither out. And that's just something that we see. So I don't want to cause that kind of same issue where this is just a mulch, fluffy mulch that can dry out. I want to make sure I have sand and clay and even some rocks within the bed as well, because I still want some of that clay and sand holding water power. Sand also for good drainage too, but I want to avoid the rocks, so I'm going to try to pick out some rocks and just sprinkle some of this dirt back in here. Don't want too many rocks. And this kind of dirt layer, I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, but will also help because there'll be a couple of, another layer or two here that'll be fluffy. So the water, at least at first, before things break down, will kind of pass through a little quick, but then it'll hit some of this dirt, it'll slow it down so that it can kind of seep through a little bit slower, if that kind of makes sense. That's the hope anyway. But it is really nice because we've been getting a lot of rain, so the dirt is wet, and that just gives me a little bit better of a head start because I'm not trying to saturate the dirt as well as the material. The dirt isn't going to try to suck up all the water before the material can. Also kind of got juniper mulch in there, but that's all right. Extra these rocks out. I'm going to stomp it just a little bit. Right. Now for a layer of compost, and as I had said earlier, if anyone was still here then, this is stuff that we got from he's a rescue, I do believe, not exactly a rancher, but a rescue, and he had piles of poo, so we took it, Brandon composted it, and we've been using it up. So I'm going to do a nice layer of compost. That looks good to me. And then I do have, this is just some smaller broken down kind of wood pieces. Just a little bit of leftovers I'll throw in there. Want to do a layer of straw. Or this is hay, not straw. And this stuff has just kind of been sitting out on the ground, so this will also be partially inoculated with some of the good fungus and bacteria from the land because it was just on the ground. Some of it was getting all mycelium filled. Want to do just a little bit more of this juniper. And so I have this bucket that's kind of hiding here. I don't want to move it so I don't spill it. But it's full of all the wood ashes from the rocket stove. I really don't want to add a lot, but I do want to do just a light little sprinkle. Get some of that potassium and good stuff. Make sure I got some of that up in the bed. And then I think this is going to be my last layer because I definitely wasn't able to get as deep as I want, so I can't create as many layers as I want. So the depth of the hole definitely dictates the depth of your layers. But this is soil from last year that was kind of just collected in this bucket from certain pots. We spilt a bunch of wheat berries in here, so there's little wheat berries that might sprout and come up. But this old soil from last year was mixed with compost, mixed with some of the juniper stuff, and worm castings and all that good stuff. So while it's used soil, it's still really good soil. And we're going to kind of top this off with this because it's already broken down. There's just the native dirt that was mixed into this soil. So like everything I put in here is in here. This is just old and broken down. As well as some seeds. So we'll see what they do. They've been kind of just sitting in here though, so I don't expect them to do much. Some of it's frozen. Alright, the rest is frozen, which is okay because so Brandon grew some of his plants in these pots and he put cover crops in them. And and so this is some native grass seed that he had gotten. He put it in these pots, they grew. The plants got chopped out of here, but we want to keep these grasses. They've actually just been sitting in these pots since like the end of September, and the grass is still growing, it's still green, so it's super cool that we're starting to cultivate native grasses, but I want them to go into this garden bed. But since this soil here was kind of frozen in the bucket, I want a little more dirt. So I'm gonna shake this grass out of this pot and use the dirt that's in the pot, because that's what this dirt was from. It was from some other pots. But I'm gonna go ahead and, because I don't want this grass in the garden bed, I'm gonna plant it around the rocks so it'll have a nice grassy outside. Because I'd rather grow like wheats and grains in the bed and then native grasses outside the bed. They'll probably get mixed up over time. That's okay. But just to start off with. But it's great because now I have all these little grass plugs that I can plant around, as well as everything I dug up. So I got lots of stuff to plant in this bed after I finish it up. Some more grass. And this is really great to see as well, because since we rotationally graze our animals, and we come from Montana, where from, you know, a real Montana winter from, you know, depending, but like September, October to May is cold and snowy and nothing grows. So being down here and seeing this, it's going to be much easier to feed our animals during the winter because things will still grow. Even this will be our third winter, and even through those last two winters, while they were definitely colder than this one has been, there was always still green stuff. There was always stuff still growing, and that's crazy to me. I'm still getting used to just what I see is it's just warm all the time. Even the coldest winter we've dealt with here is tropical, and it's fabulous, and I love it. We're green and warm all year round, and it's strange and wonderful. All right, is that enough dirt? Let's just go ahead. We'll mix up a little bit more of. Oh, I do have this soil. This is just some leftover stuff from when Brandon was brewing compost tea. So that's really good stuff to throw up in the garden, and some of it's still frozen too. So I don't want that. Use you somewhere else. Maybe mix it up just a bit. Go. I don't want to step on it to compress it down right now. I definitely want to go through and tamp it a bit. Because when you create a Hügelkultur bed, no matter what, you're going to get sinkage over time. I mean, kind of any garden bed, you're going to get that sinkage. But especially kind of with the Hügelkultur bed, depending on what your layers consist of, some of them can break down really quick and you get a lot of sinking. So I like to make sure I'm doing the compression through the layers as I go so that I can mitigate that just a little bit, because sometimes it can cause kind of funny problems. Nothing serious, but all of a sudden your bed is like 3 inches shallower than you want it, and depending on the plants, it can be hard to add soil to it in the middle of the season. Sometimes it kind of depends on what you're growing, but do want to compress this down, because again, this is all really fluffy material anyway. But I think that's at the level I'd like it to be. So it is kind of at this point where I need a little bit more dirt, I think, but I'm going to start kind of replanting some stuff. But since I need a little more dirt, I've got one more pot here with a nice clump of grass. So we'll add this. Pause for a drink and to see what comments I got going on. All right. Notes about AZ. You live north across the Mongolian Rim, which is a massive escarpment that cuts across the upper. Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. Took me a second, but I dig it. UUE 88, good technique to hold water. I'd also like to see use and creation of biochar, as it's permanent and only gets better with time, making biochar the best use of woody materials using the pit method. And I definitely agree. So we do biochar, but I think we implement it a little bit different. Sorry, my allergies and my eye is watering. But I think we implement it a little bit differently than most do. Instead of creating just kind of the biochar itself, we'll create the char, crush it up at least to a point, and we'll put it in our compost, or just kind of that system so it can sit through the compost process and charge that way, just so that we know that it's charged with good moisture, bacteria, fungus, and nutrients. Because if you add char that isn't charged, because you have char and then biochar, just if you don't know, like, you know, to folks who may not know, biochar, it has the all the microorganisms and the nutrients in it. So we start with the char, we charge it with all the biology, and if you don't charge it with all the biology and nutrients before it goes into your garden bed, it can actually rob the garden bed of all the good stuff until it's charged, and then it'll start kind of releasing and kind of cycling through. So we do biochar, but it's not putting it directly in the bed, kind of like from the campfire. If we're doing char, it's just added into the compost, and as well as into teas and certain stuff. But also, I guess, you know, using wood ash, there is still a little bit of char in there. So sometimes we do raw char, does get kind of sprinkled around. But yeah, biochar is super amazing. The properties and things that it does and can do, and the fact that it's pretty much a forever helper in the garden once it's there, is super fabulous. And just kind of on that note, it's interesting, we've had several fires through the area So when we dig, there's actually layers of char in there. So whenever I find that char, I grab it because it's full of all the native good stuff, and I sprinkle it into the garden. Polka dot adventure. The area you are in was a highly volcanic area millions of years ago, and also underwater at one point. It has a mix of deep sandstone and volcanic after effects across the state towards New Mexico. And that's super cool because where I'm from in Montana was also more like glacial, but also volcanic activity. But down here, like on our property, it's super nuts when it comes to like everything you said. We see that all in one spot. We have the volcanic rock, we have all the different agates, or not agates, quartz crystals, and as well as like I've seen 3 different types of like the sandstone that was once like the ocean bottom. There's this one rock that it's in a couple different areas, but it's green and it almost looks like a turtle shell, but some of them have like fossils and stuff in there. And it's super cool because moving from Montana, I was born and raised in Montana, and this is my first time moving anywhere relatively far away. You know, in Montana, we'd go up to the tops of the Rockies and find marine fossils. And it's super cool that I come here and I've also found marine fossils, as well as just all the cool stuff that is different from Montana, but also similar, but just in a different way. And it makes Arizona feel more like home in that way. But it's super cool to see. There's like a purple sandstone, the green sandstone. And then there's a couple areas where we're pretty sure it was like once like a lava tube, and it's just super cool. The geography, the geology, everything out here is just incredibly unique, and I really appreciate just how unique Arizona is. You know, when I told my family and stuff, I'm moving to Arizona, they're like, oh, a desert? And we're in the mountains, you know, the northern Arizona, and you know, I send them pictures and it looks just like Montana. But it's super amazing down here. I appreciate the nice weather, no winter, the amazing rocks. I'm a rock hound, so that's kind of a problem. I have a lot of rocks now, but just all the different awesomenesses all over the place is fabulous. Jackie, hi Jackie, I miss you too. I hope to see you on Wednesday. Friction hitch, I'm in a similar area to you. What do you have planted? What do you have planted to plan? What have you planned to plant? Goodness, I can't read today. For January and February, early plantings. So kind of my plan, like I don't want to get too excited. Montana has taught me a lesson about getting too excited. And even here in Arizona, you know, you can get some frosty days into almost May. So that's very similar in that sense. But my plans for planting I don't think I'll plant too much outside in January. But come February and March, I'll definitely start planting just more cold season stuff. I do have some started inside, so I'll actually have just some hopefully baby seedlings that I can plant out. And then there's lots of seeds still hiding in the beds too, so like technically there is stuff already planted, but also probably some cover crops, beans. I do want to do some radishes. But I'm also kind of looking at the landscape and seeing what native stuff is kind of coming up. And I've been kind of digging some of those up and putting them in my garden beds. So it's between, hold on, I got to get a cat out my garden. Okay. For some reason, the cats keep chewing on my garlic, and I don't know why. But anyway, so like garlic and stuff, I'll probably plant some onions, some garlic, you know, just cold season stuff for the next month or so. But I have gotten pretty excited, and here soon I'll definitely be showing off more of my seedling stuff, because just for those on the live, you'll get a little hint, I guess, for my next video. But the rocket stove has been working amazing as a seedling mat, and I've just had great germination. I'm gonna have too many plants here in a minute, taking up too much space because I got too excited and started them too early. But I'm super excited for this gardening season because, you know, these beds have had a little time to kind of break down and kind of situate. So I'm hoping that we'll just have, you know, they'll be better at holding water and absorbing water and keeping cool and that kind of thing. Oh no, the wind. But slow process, not trying to plant too much at one time, being as we are kind of doing the dry farm thing. Once again, kind of hence trying out this kind of Hügelkultur bed experiment. We want to grow things that need little water. And the things, you know, just kind of the regular stuff that people like to grow that do need more water, we want to plant them in very specific spots that we know will stay wetter, cooler for longer to help them handle not only the dry, but when it gets super hot. So, hope that answers your question. Angel, wildfires concern me most when looking at land. And I definitely agree. And that's just where I kind of recommend, you know, when looking at land, you want to look at what you can do to create fire, what you can do to mitigate fire. So just kind of learning about certain fire breaks, cutting trees back from your property line so you have a nice fire break, creating mounds, creating water catchment, but also just being very vigilant. Coming from Montana where we were also off-grid in Montana, that it's being vigilant, it's paying attention. If, like, Montana has lots of dry lightning, so for the most part, like 90% of our fires are caused by dry lightning, and the only reason those are ever called in before they're insane and taking out half the forest is because people call them in. So when it comes to being worried about fires, I totally understand, totally valid. But just learning about different strategies to protect your property from fire hopefully will help you kind of feel better and not worry so much, because, you know, forest fires, but then sometimes towns burn down too. So no matter what you do and where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish, you know, that's always kind of a concern. But just like a house, you do certain things to protect your house from fire, and you just work on, you know, looking for land where you have the ability to do that as well. Because like for us, you know, we have like we have 2 fire extinguishers, and one of them is specifically for if like there's a lightning strike, I can run out there with a fire extinguisher and maybe hopefully put out the fire at the tree, kind of idea. Regarding biochar, useful for compost toilet too. Have you tried the pit method? For our compost toilet kind of practices, we've always done, essentially it's kind of like a cat litter style. It's a bucket, and every time you go, you dump it. But we do also put, not biochar, but we put char into it. So it's kind of just essentially it composting with everything and doing the same thing. But yeah, it works super great. I highly recommend biochar as well as wood ash. And if you use compost toilets, I also recommend, like, we will also use the material from under the junipers for our litter instead of sawdust, because it has all the fungus and the bacteria and the good stuff to help break everything down. UUE88. There are a lot of cold hardy varieties of fruit trees you can find these days that you can grow, even figs and citrus. You're in what hardiness zone? We're in 3A or 4A. One of the two. I really don't go by zones as much. And that's partially because the way we build things, and like with our greenhouse, everything stays a lot warmer, so we are able to grow things out of zone, if that makes sense. But also we have been looking into lots of different plants and their hardiness, but also it's a little bit more about rootstock. Most of the fruit trees and stuff you get are grafted, so Brandon anyway really focuses on looking for the appropriate rootstocks, so we can graft other fruit trees onto those rootstocks, and we can have more of a variety. But yeah, we have a fig, we are starting some moringa, we have peach and apple, and then like raspberry and goji berries. And so it's just a slow build up, not trying to get too much at once. But yeah, we're definitely looking into all the fruit trees. Sorry that it's windy today. But you know, we don't want to get too much at once. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make when starting out with homesteading, whether it's plants, animals, garden space, but especially because we are off-grid, we don't have electricity, we're not a plug and play, we have to think about water and how much garden space we have and how much water that garden space is going to need and those kinds of aspects. So it's as we build up the earthworks, as we build up the garden beds, as we build up as much water as we're catching, we'll slowly add in more plants, add in more garden space. Because even though I have quite a bit of garden space, I'm not going to be like crazy full planting it. I'll have a couple of main beds that I plant, and sustain. And then there'll be other ones that I kind of ignore. So that's why we want to try to grow lots of native stuff as well, is because we can ignore that stuff. It doesn't need anything, it's native, it's fine. Maybe a little water now and again, but slow build-ups. But very soon we'll be getting more and more because we're starting to accelerate a little bit. As things come together, things can go a little faster and we can get more. Friction hitch. I'm an arborist, so I'm fairly familiar with trees. I'm less of a produce gardener. That's the learning curve that I'm currently working on in my journey. I'm fairly familiar with trees. I'm less of a produce gardener. So like, do you mean like you're not trying to produce a lot and you're just growing stuff? Because I mean, I just like growing stuff and playing with trees and planting stuff. And Brandon's definitely more familiar with all the tree stuff. I'm a little bit more on the veggie side of things, but slowly kind of picking out trees and picking out what we want to do. And what's the term? Is it silviculture? Silvotropic? I think I just mashed the two there. But where we kind of slowly replace the native trees that are here, or not native, but the ones like these junipers, we feel they're decently native. They're not the invasive kind. These junipers are not the invasive juniper species. These ones are technically considered native. It's just a giant monoculture due to a lot of things happening over time, in our opinion. But over time, we do want to replace them with like fruit trees, native trees. You know, we want to try mesquite. We're a little cold for mesquite, but we still want to try. But just the slow buildup, slow replacement of certain things, and create more variety and diversity. Polka Dot Adventures, I have so many rocks. So many rocks. Too many rocks. Like, we have rocks for like, I could have a rock hounding convention and there would still be rocks. There'd be so many. Kaylee, hi. Nice that you came and joined the live. Kind of just answering questions and working on a Hügelkultur bed, but I needed a little break. Polka Dot Adventures, Zone 6 to 7A. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm thinking Montana. Thank you. I appreciate it. I see it so similar here in Arizona that sometimes people ask me a question and I'll answer it as if I was in Montana. So my apologies. Friction hitch. Are you going to mound up that bed above grade or leave it depressed below grade? So we are definitely going to leave it depressed below grade because what we have learned through, there's this raised bed and this raised bed here, and they're only like barely a foot above grade, and they're actually really hard to keep wet enough. Like, I've tried several different varieties of plants. Even peppers aren't, they're okay, but they're definitely not a big fan. My walking onions love it though, but we definitely learned through the couple raised bed experiments that for what we're trying to do and just what we want to do too, we've decided kind of no more raised beds. I mean, maybe a little bit, but we definitely want to keep it more of a depression, more of a bowl, so that rainwater can pool up in there better. When we're watering, it'll kind of pool up into like exactly kind of where we want it versus the possibility of it spreading out a little bit more. So this is definitely going to stay depressed, as well as I've learned that when I do the rocks around the beds, I actually want to depress those as well, at least a little bit, so that the water doesn't like seep through the rocks and not water the bed instead. I meant making biochar with the pit method because you can make huge amounts. Oh, I see, my bad. We don't feel we need to make that much at a time because since a little bit goes a long way, the char that we use is just kind of what we get from the fireplace. Because like I said, you know, we don't want to add, being as this is an area that, I mean, you know, there's been cows, there's been people over time, but we're coming in trying to help things, but sometimes by adding too much too fast, it can just kind of do the opposite. But we want the nativeness around here to kind of acclimate to what we're doing. We also want to see if it's hurting things, you know, like, you know, if we do like a swale in front of a bush and like that bush is dying, we can be like, oh no, maybe we need to scoot the swale over so that bush doesn't die because it doesn't like all that water. And that can be the same thing with certain amendments like char and compost. You know, some things don't like fertile ground. Some things will die if it's too fertile. Just like things will die if it's not fertile enough. So we want to do just small, slow implementation of things, but as well, it's not as necessary to spread biochar en masse, like all over the place, because we've had forest fires in the past. I think I was saying earlier, we can dig around and we can find like layers of char in the ground. So there's no need for us to make extra because within the landscape already has it. It's just helpful for us to like dig up the spot and till it in a little bit. So it's mostly just the little bit of char that we need/want in kind of our garden spaces, at least for now. Kaylee, warm day here also. Edge of nowhere, starting pre-spring planting and pruning. Now a video yesterday. Yes, yep. So we are pretty excited to get, I think everybody's always excited for spring planting and planning, and that's kind of what making this bed is getting ready to plant. And I'm super itching and I have tons of little seedlings and I'm just always too excited. I'm always too excited for spring and to grow stuff. And this is our 3rd season, so I'm even more excited. And I really hope that, I've produced stuff, you know, I have tomatoes and zucchinis and lots of greens and stuff, but I'm hoping to definitely up my game this year, and I'm very excited. But so now that hopefully I've answered everybody's questions for now, I'm gonna go back to building the bed. Essentially what I wanna do is maybe compress it just a little bit more. I wanna do the rest of kind of the rock rim, and then I will be planting in the stuff, some of the stuff that I pulled out, as well as those grasses, and then maybe a little bit of seed. So let's do that. So I do need a couple more rocks. How about this one? Maybe this one. Fit right there. Oh, look at that. Perfection. You're gonna go in there. I want to fix here. Level this out a bit. Alright, and as I said with the native grasses, I don't want to plant them in the bed. They'll probably end up there anyway at some point. But for now, I just want to plant them around the edges. So we'll go ahead and put this little pretty baby right in this edge. One. Got quite a few actually. Might have to spread them out to somewhere else maybe. And then there's all these little rocks that are kind of from tearing up the rock setup I had. But I'm going to take all these little rocks and put them next to where I planted the grass. And that's partially because we have found that when it comes to this environment, it's definitely too rocky. But the rocks are a fabulous mulch. I'd say when it comes to mulching layers, rocks out here are one of the best because they absorb the heat and then throw it out at night versus kind of like your woody mulches and stuff, they just dry out instead of absorbing the heat. So I like to put kind of rocks everywhere I can where they're not in the way of growing stuff essentially, but they just help protect the soil, they help hold the moisture. So sometimes in certain places I like to fill spaces between rocks, between garden beds with some more rocks. Because while the rocks are great, there is such thing as too many. Just like kind of this garden bed showed, there's way too many big rocks, making the garden bed have trouble growing. Hence why I'm redoing it. But they're also super helpful in this environment. So we always want to look at nature, what is nature doing, and we want to copy that. And what the nature is doing out here is protecting itself with rocks. So that's what we use all these darn rocks for. Got to do something with them. You might as well build with them. Oh, there's some more. All right, so we got some grass planted. We got our rocks laid. We've got our mulch mess. And this is just mulch that was where kind of I'm sitting. I'm just going to kind of spread this mulch back out, mix it up with kind of the dirt that I dug up. Move all these rocks too. Level this out a bit. And so I did also ruin this little circle bed here, and it's just going to stay a tiny circle because I did discover also there's a giant rock underneath it, but I really don't want to tear up this anymore. I'll just have to remember that whatever I put here better be able to deal with drier conditions because that rock is going to push away the water essentially. But maybe because there's a Hügelkultur bed here, it'll stay moist, helping this area stay moist as well. So maybe that rock won't cause any more issue in the future since this bed is the way it is now, but we'll have to see. But I do want to put its rocks back, and oh, I threw my tool. But I want to remake its little circle. Backfill those rocks. Move some more stuff. I'll just move this one. This big rock is going to be the edge to this garden, but it's just in the way right now. Okay. And I still need some rocks over here. Need some bigger rocks. That one's too big. You can have all the rocks in the world, but not the size you need. There we go. Rock layering. Alright, so obviously I've kind of distorted this bed a little bit. So we'll put some compost in here and kind of fill it up. And then when I'm ready to plant, it'll also be ready for planting. But let's backfill these rocks here. Work on this edge. So this rock here is actually like really huge. And I wasn't able to dig it out, so that kind of dictated where this bed went. And then there's also another one right here. So it's a little hard to stack rocks on rocks, but we'll get her figured out. Let's see if we can use this big one right there. Maybe flip it. Nope. This way. How about that way? Yeah, just like that. It's a little big, but that's all right. Look, that fit perfect. Maybe. There we go. Alright, so now for stacking on this rock, I think a big rock. I think I might just use this one. Look, like it was made for that spot. Bam. These to fill it in. Oh, perfection. There we go. We'll backfill all these. I do also find it's important to do some backfilling, because since these are also kind of an earthwork, if water were to fill this space, the more bermed up behind the rocks, the higher the water has a chance to get, and hopefully can sit and soak for longer. So I definitely like to make sure I berm up the backs of any rocks, and also kind of shove rocks in little holes that I can kind of shove dirt up in there. Kind of seal them up a little bit. I can also do mud. I do a lot of mudding, so that's also a great option for me. Hold on just a sec. My phone is dying. There we go. All right, any comments? Nope, not yet. Rock on. All right. So, this isn't quite as circular as I want, so I'm going to adjust just a little bit because I'm a little picky. Oh, it's not so bad. I think I want to tweak it here. Try to sift out kind of all the mulch from some of the dirt because I made just kind of a crazy mess. Now that we're pretty set up this wise, I'm gonna go get some water so I can do an initial watering, and then I might add a little bit more dirt, but then I'll get to planting some more stuff. We have to let this sit and soak a minute because since that kind of top layer of dirt that I put in there was already pretty wet, this might take just a second to kind of drain down if you can't see that it's kind of pooled of water. But I want to plant the stuff that I dug up earlier, some more of the grass, and then I do also have some seed that I will be planting in here. It's mostly just going to be native grasses, again, for around the rocks, but then I think I want to sprinkle maybe a little bit of amaranth. And then I have a cover crop mixture that has like, it's technically like for deer, but it's like alfalfa and clover and chicory and just some other stuff. So I just want to get some stuff in here since this is a totally new bed. Nothing is established in here, especially root wise. Like I would in a sense kind of like it to do nothing for a while, but since I have some stuff to plant into it and I have some seeds, we'll see what happens as it grows anyway. But give that just a second to drain down, and we'll pick out some of the plants that were already in there, not the grass. We'll plant some more of that in a minute, but I have this really nice chunk here. There is, oh, there's some chicory. Oh yeah, I got a few chicories in here, so that's great. I'm glad I may not plant that cover crop. Ooh, and there's worms in this dirt, so I'll also get their worms. But here's some chicory plants here, and I'll just poke a hole. Plant those babies down in there. Ooh, it might not be deep enough. Where is my poker? I have no idea how well these will do because I did pull them up. Don't know how chicory likes being transplanted and dug up, but they do have some nice rootage, so we shall see. And also within this clump, so this is kale chunks, kind of whatever the chickens didn't eat the tops off of, that I planted last spring, and they're still sort of growing if it weren't for the chickens eating them. But this is just a nice clump of everything from last year, and I think I'm just going to put it in by itself. There's some clover and alfalfa in here, so put those off to the side. Let's see. I think this is a wild lettuce. Nope, more chicory. So we'll plant some more chicory. And my phone says it's dying again. I'll be right back. I need a battery. All right. So any comments coming in? Ernie's Cabin, I'm starting to get the feeling you love playing in the dirt. I do, very much. I could play in the dirt all day, every day, for the rest of my life. Friction hitch. I missed the part where you started backfilling on the top of the wood. What was your soil mixture made up of? So, well, let me remember. I did wood, and then I did juniper, and then I did just some of the dirt that I had dug up from the hole, and then a little bit more juniper and straw, and then the top layer of soil is soil from last year that was in pots that we just kind of collected up, and I use that as the top layer. And that soil was soil that we mixed from stuff on the property, so it was our compost and juniper material and worm castings and that kind of stuff. So just anything kind of from the property and leftover soil from last year is what I filled this hole with. Most of the woodiest, thickest stuff is on the very bottom, since that's where all the water is going to get to. And I want to make sure that wood has plenty of time with that water so it has the opportunity to absorb it. So we'll have to see, and I'll keep updating, because I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more videos in the garden. Probably more lives too in the garden, so we can just sit and chit chat about gardening stuff. But we'll definitely be keeping tabs on this and see what happens. I definitely am not going to exactly count the plants I'm planting today, because I did rip them up. I have no idea what they're going to do. But once I start planting like specific plants into there, like I think I want to do a zucchini, since those are one of the most kind of water hungry things that I keep trying to grow because I love zucchini. But from there, we'll see how it fares with my method of Hügelkultur in-ground madness. Ernie's Cabin, 30 below at 3 feet of snow. It's nice to watch you in the garden learning lots. Thanks. Well, thank you very much for coming and watching. I definitely do not miss all that snow and cold. I definitely appreciate being what is it? It's almost the end of January, really. We're past the middle at this point. But I love being out in this very warm day. A little chilly with the breeze, but it's fabulous. So I'll get back to planting this bed, and then I'll do a couple of seeds, and then we'll do a last little questions. So any questions you have, hold until I finish up some planting. Just because I want to show you guys, see before he goes all the way in. See little Mr. Wormy up in there? We only inoculated these first 2 garden beds with worms, and almost every garden bed now has plenty of worms. So it's really great because that is one thing that lacks out here are little soil bugs to break down stuff, but that's also because there's not a lot of organic matter for them to eat. So when it comes to here, like I kind of cultivate grubs because there's nothing for them to eat. So they're in the garden and they don't harm the plants because there's so much organic matter in that soil. So I get to cultivate grubs, pull them out, feed my chickens. They help the soil, which helps me grow more food to feed the soil, to feed the grubs, and grow more grubs to feed the chickens, and just on and on it goes. And it's great because bringing in the nature, or we bring in stuff that brings in more of the nature, or we create a system where nature wants to come hang out and help improve our soil. It's really amazing that if you build it, they will come, and it's awesome. That's more chicory, so we'll do chicory. Then I think this one's alfalfa, so put some alfalfa here. And I really like growing alfalfa in the garden because being it's a nitrogen fixer, it's fabulous, but also if I'm going through for the animals, it's great because I can just kind of pull it up with whatever else I'm picking out of the garden for them. And it also, you know, it's a cover crop, but I also do chop and drop. So if a little alfalfa plant gets a little ruly, I just chop it up, sprinkle it, and it helps just build the soil that way. So just in case anyone's wondering why I have alfalfa growing in my garden. But it's also for people too. People can eat alfalfa. Just saying. Can also be thrown into your salad. And I think I'm just going to kind of pick the rest of all these out. These ones are a little damaged. Oop, not that one. I'm just going to bundle these up and we're just going to stick them in here together. And then, since I have all this leftover soil from when I dug all those out, we'll just sprinkle that up in here. And I kind of want to work it up into the rocks, I think, a little bit. Just again, I want to keep that bowl aspect to this bed on the outside and the inside. So on the outside of the rocks, the soil comes up. On the inside of the rocks, the soil comes up. So whenever it rains or water comes through, it'll fill up before it spreads out, and hopefully it'll sink down and spread out. Oh, but lots of worms. It's great. Makes me very happy to see that even though the plants weren't doing good because of the rocks, the worms sure were doing fabulous. And I keep finding grubs too, so good healthy soil, good organic matter, just too rocky. Alright, so now I have the plants that I dug up planted in there. I still have to do some of the grass, so maybe I'll throw one of those grasses right here really quick. Looks like a good spot. kind of planting it into the mulch really, but we'll see how it does. Shouldn't mind too much. But that's what it'll be. It'll also be an experiment on how well the native grasses, even though we grew it, we'll see how well they transplant. And put this one, maybe we'll fill this spot here with this one. And again, it's really helpful doing this at the ground. The ground has never been this wet before. We have gotten the most moisture ever in a short amount of, like, since we've been here. It was about 2 months of decent raininess, and it was when the weather was getting cooler, so the ground really had a good chance to saturate. So with the dirt being this wet, which last year and the year before it was not, I'm really excited to see what this season will bring and just how well the garden will do with that kind of head start to be like it's pre-watered almost. So I'm really excited for that opportunity to see what a wet winter will do to the coming spring. But now that I have what I want planted, this is my seed tower. Not that one. But I do want to put a few seeds up in here. Oh yes. So I'm going to do an experiment. So this is going to be another experiment that I will be doing this year with kind of the idea that plants know when to sprout. Not always, but my friend kind of accidentally tested a theory with chickpeas, and he had planted some, and it was really cold, and he thought that they wouldn't come up, but all of a sudden they all started coming up, and he realized that when they started coming up, it was the time you could plant all the other stuff. So I'm actually going to plant a few chickpeas into here, and I want to plant them other places in the garden, but I want to use them as kind of like a it's time to plant outside indicator. So it'll be kind of an experiment as well, but I have some chickpeas, and I'm just going to poke a couple on kind of the edges because they do get kind of tall and they'll make for some good shade to whatever else I plant in there. So stuff that I want to grow to shade stuff, I'll be growing on the edges. So I'm just going to poke some peas all up in this bed. Alright, planted with some chickpeas. I got all these sunflowers, I might as well pop a couple sunflower seeds in here, right? Let's see, the sun, want them to face, so let's have them planted. Ooh, we'll do some here. And some here. Then hopefully I'll have 2 little bunches of sunflowers that can come up, and they'll help shade kind of the high noon sun come summer. We'll see. It's the plan. Because then if I do a zucchini in here, I'll have the chickpeas, the beans, I'll have the sunflowers, and then I'll have the squash. And we'll do the whole Three Sisters thing. And then here is a mix of native grasses. So I think I'm just gonna, it's just a little sesame seed shaker, and I'm just gonna and shake this all up around these racks. Right, so some native grasses on the edges, and that'll also help, they'll kind of fill in the space between the rocks, kind of hiding the good example. But like right here, we had grass. I doubt you can see it from way over there, but it's really great when the grasses kind of pop out from the rocks because they just create another barrier to hold, catch, and retain water. So I definitely like planting grasses around the rocks. And as nature here shows, all the grasses like to be up against a rock because they're going to hold moisture and they're going to be warmer during the winter, and just all those factors. Nature definitely shows that the grasses like to be planted up against a rock. Not saying it's necessary for them, but they sure like it. So let's see what else. Oh, here's some amaranth seeds. I don't want too many. I definitely planted, actually it's kind of too late to say I don't want too many. There's tons everywhere. But I don't want too many in the bed. So I'm just gonna sprinkle just a few and then just a few on the outside. But the amaranth this past year did amazing. I mean, even though the ones that got watered because they were in the garden next to stuff did super good, but I was able to feed, like my animals ate it a lot and they absolutely loved it. So it was super fabulous that amaranth, you know, you get the grains, but the greens are also really healthy and edible for not only us but for animals, and it just made a fabulous fodder. So that's something I am going to keep continuously growing, are different varieties of amaranth, but also there's like 3 or 4 native varieties of amaranth. And I've also been, me and my buddy Joe, we've slowly been identifying and collecting those native amaranth seeds, and I've already spread a bunch throughout the area. So, you know, not only growing the kind of domesticated plants and amaranths and different varieties, but definitely trying to find the native ones and propagating them around too. We got our amaranth, got some sunflower seeds. I can't think of anything else that I may want to plant in here. Ooh, how about some flax seed? We could always use some flowers, right? I'm gonna toss some flax up in here. We'll see if those come up. I do also have tapari and Hopi lima beans and anasazi beans, but it's way too early for those. I've tried the last couple years and I'm used to cold season beans, but native Arizona beans don't like to be planted until it's hot out. So definitely waiting a little bit on some of the native beans, but here soon I will be planting more cold season beans. But I think that's all I want to plant into this bed as of now. Essentially it's just going to be waiting for the baby zucchini to come up. But this bed is all situated and got a few seeds in there, the plants that were originally in this bed. But I'm definitely excited to see what happens with this bed, because these little circle gardens did do pretty good last year, but this one just did the worst. And like when I built it, I knew there was a big rock. I didn't know it was that big of a problem until I was able to dig it up. And the reason I was digging it up is because with the ground being so wet and saturated, I've been able to pull out just tons of huge rocks. And when I was working on this garden, I was like, oh, I might as well pull it out, and ended up destroying it. But hopefully with accidentally destroying it, I was able to build it better. And so I think, like, you know, maybe weekly I'll do a short, or I'll mention it in whatever garden video, but I'll definitely keep up with what this bed is doing, how it's doing, you know, and just letting you know how it's doing. Just for that experimental factor, because we know that Hügelkultur beds work. We know that they are a practice that is wonderfully useful in many situations. But sometimes with those practices, we do have to adapt them to a certain degree for our environment. And as I had said earlier, you know, Hügelkultur is a mounded garden, so it's above ground, and here it's too hot, it's too dry, things evaporate too quickly to want to focus on kind of the raised garden bed practice. Like, the raised garden beds are great, but not so much we have found for ourselves here in Arizona. Like, if we had $1 million and we could build a big old awning and giant awesome shade cloths, we could probably do more raised garden beds. But we want to work with the nature, and here nature says a depression is great because it'll hold water, it catches seeds, it catches organic material, and it creates pockets of fertility for stuff to grow. So we want to copy that in our garden space. So we're going to do more depressions, more at least, we want to be level with the ground more so than above it. I'm pretty sure we'll still do a couple more raised beds here and there, but they will have to be planted more specifically, which means the raised beds might just turn into native garden beds where we're trying to propagate lots of native stuff. But all of these garden beds have been a very slow build-up, not only with just kind of time and energy, money, even though these are basically free, but just kind of that idea. But we're also building up things very slowly in the sense of we don't want to overbuild one thing and not have the other things we need to sustain it. So when it comes to the garden, with the garden you need water. And we don't want to build too much garden space and be trying to grow too much stuff that it really causes problems with our water usage. Because of course we can haul water if we run out of rainwater. But that's kind of what these practices are. It's trying to rely as little as we can on a well, and that includes hauling water. Whether it was if we had a well, we would try not to use it at all. We want to be reliant, or we want to be more sustainable in the sense of rainwater. We want to make it so the ground catches and holds all the water that it can, and then through different rain catchment methods, we want to catch and hold as much rain as we can. But we can't build too much garden space, as well as we can't get too many animals when it comes to how much rain catchment we have. So as our rain catchment and our soil and our abilities grow, the gardens will be able to grow, we'll be able to expand more, get more animals, etc., etc. And with practices like Hügelkultur, and depending on where you are, raised beds, the mulching, the compost, the biochar, and all the other different practices, we're implementing them in different ways, in different places, at different times, for different reasons, but slowly it'll all accumulate into being hopefully a relatively self-sustaining system at some point. This is a slow, tedious at some time kind of build up. Takes time, but for me, we've already seen the benefits and the returns. The returns might not be huge, but as I said, we are still green in January. Like, I have never had green plants growing that I could eat in January before. So even without mass growth and just tons of production, this has been fabulous. Last year's growing season was great, and I'm super excited to start garden season 3 down here in Arizona, and slowly implementing each practice and experimenting and seeing what practice is going to work best for us. Because, a lot of times when someone says, well, how did you learn how to do this or that? I did a lot of experimenting, a lot of practice, lots of watching videos, because you can read and learn about something all you want, but you're not going to know how to do it until you get your hands in the dirt and do the thing. So that's what we like to do, is we like to try out things, experiment with things, and see how they function. And many of these experiments we've done before, but now that we're in a new place, we have to redo them and see if they are as effective or not as effective as they were in Montana, so to say. But I think I've rambled on enough. We'll see if there's some comments or questions. If you have some questions you'd like to ask me, be a great time to throw those out. UUE88, you just have to be mindful about temporary nitrogen deficiency when mixing woody material close to the top layer. That's not usually a problem with Hügelkultur when you use large logs. And that is totally true. And so that is kind of where, like, once again, it is adapting the practice. And that is something to think about when it comes to the breakdown of materials and deficiencies that it may cause and that kind of aspect. And that is where it's really great with the way we do mulching, chop and drop. You know, Brandon does cover crops and compost teas and worm casting teas and that kind of thing. So far with our experimenting, we've never had those issues because we're able to kind of counteract them with the other practices that we utilize. Kylie, couldn't she just pour some diluted urine over it to accelerate the composting process? You definitely can, but that's kind of something that I think people kind of look too hard into in the sense of like how to make it happen faster. Because faster isn't always beneficial, because during composting processes, especially if you're doing like hot compost, it can get really hot and you can cause burning. And that is something that urine, even diluted urine, can cause. It can cause an acceleration and a heat up. I mean, many things can do that, not just pee. But those are practices we could use, but it's not exactly necessary because we don't want accelerated breakdown unless we're doing compost. If you want that accelerated breakdown, you do want to add stuff in there to help with that. But when it comes to like these Hügelkultur beds, we do want a slower breakdown. We want a good home for all the biology and the microbes and the fungus. And the longer that wood stays kind of woody, more spongy before it essentially gets turned into soil, kind of the better, because we'll have that nice woody sponge for longer in that general sense. But also depends on kind of what you're trying to do. And for us though, we do want a slower breakdown. And like I had said, you know, we don't want to use too fat of logs here because they'll never get saturated. As I had said earlier, that there are logs that have been buried out yonder for like ever, and they're not like, they're still hard. I could carve a spoon and have a really awesome spoon from that wood. So wood here breaks down super slow anyway, but by doing what we're doing when it comes to this environment, it will be technically an acceleration because we are adding more microbes, more moisture to that wood. So there's no need to extra fuel it, I guess. Not that it would be a bad thing though either. Yes, and urine also increases the alkalinity. So in that sense, you know, everything you add in, you have to think about like what's it gonna do to like the pH. And you know, if you add too much of one nutrient, it can cause issues with another nutrient. Some nutrients will latch on to each other, and you can cause like nutrient locks where there's like it's in the soil but it's stuck with something else that the plant can't uptake it. So there's definitely kind of the balance of things, but that's where we have definitely found that the more, I get in the sense, the more organic and natural you do things, the less you have to worry about a lot of other issues. And that includes nitrogen deficiencies, pH issues, salinities, and those things. We definitely have found that the more organic you do it, the less you have to worry about those things. Things like, you know, that's why we like to use dry amendments, compost teas. We don't use any like store-bought fertilizers, even if they were organic. Just in the sense of how we like to do things. And even if we're like, man, that bed might have a problem because X, Y, and Z, we feel that because we did things very organically, lots of biology and bacteria and fungus, that creates kind of a buffer. They're able to buffer some of those issues so they're not an actual issue. And over time, the fungus, the bacteria, the nature will kind of help balance those things out. And that's just our experience and kind of what we've seen doing things the way we do. So we never worry too much ourselves about imbalances, because as long as we're inputting good stuff, good bacteria, good fungus, it'll balance out. Kylie, oh, thank you for the process explanation. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, and honestly, it's super simple. It's a bunch of composting material that you put together, and you can either make a mound or stick it in a hole. It breaks down and it makes a really nice, fluffy, spongy, delicious bed for whatever you feel like growing. And I'm super hopeful with this little garden space. I hope it does super awesome, but we will have to find out. And I hope y'all are interested enough to stay tuned. And I think that's about it today. I'll kind of, people who are interested, I'll definitely try to like make posts like, oh, hey, this day we're going to check on the Hügelkultur bed, or we're going to play in the garden and we'll see how this bed is doing. But I have a lot of high hopes for this bed. Like I said, Hügelkultur needs to be tinkered with when you live in a drier area, but it's also very effective. And it would be more effective if the wood you were using was allowed to soak in water, because as we all know, it takes forever for a stick to absorb enough water to sink, and that's kind of what you want to happen in a garden, in a Hügelkultur bed. And since we're so dry, it takes a long time for that to happen. So that's why I use smaller wood pieces, and hopefully that will help kind of that process of the wood breaking down, but also make it easier for it to absorb the water and for the plants to be able to reap that benefit. But like I said, this is an experiment. I mean, we know it'll work, experiment, but we'll see how well it works in Arizona with the way I did it, experiment. So I hope you all enjoyed today's live. I really appreciate you all hanging out and watching me play in the dirt and plant some stuff. And I hope any of you who are getting ready to start your spring gardens are super excited, because I also am. And stay tuned for the next live or garden installment. Happy gardening. Peace.